my name is Gemma Quinn. I work here in the pharmacy department, and the course that I've used PebblePad on mostly is the MSc Diploma and Certificate in hospital pharmacy for qualified pharmacists. So they're working as pharmacists already. I'll put my details there. So I'll try and introduce as briefly as I can what we needed from the course, why we turned to PebblePad, exactly what we wanted for our assessments. I'll talk very briefly about the general level framework. That's a competency framework that we use, so you kind of need to understand a little bit about it to understand how we've used it. Talk about our course requirements, so we decided first what we wanted to do, then talk about why PebblePad, and hopefully give you some tips so you can maybe learn from some of the mistakes we've made along the way. Okay, so the background. This diploma is used by all hospitals in the country, really use a clinical pharmacy diploma. And most of the hospitals in our region, in Yorkshire and the Humber, use the Bradford diploma. So when I first started, we had about 40 students on. We now have about 70 students. So they're hospitals all around the region. These are newly qualified pharmacists who are employed by the hospitals, they're paid by the hospitals, and it's part of their contract that they have a clinical diploma. So they can't progress, they can't get the next band up if they're not doing the diploma or the certificate. So they're basically forced to do it. But the alternative to that is that it's kind of the creme de la creme of pharmacy students who get jobs in hospital, so they're generally fairly well motivated and engaged. So they need to get the diploma for promotion, and the hospitals do support them, so that's where we have the advantage over you. I think that the hospitals are very active and they are happy for their tutors to do assessments. So the students are released one day a month, so that's when we actually see them, and the rest of everything else is done kind of via email, electronic submissions, etc. and PebblePad. So I came to Bradford in 2008, and at that point I was a bit like you, given this diploma, and basically it became apparent that no one had really reviewed the diploma for about the last 25 years. So it was extremely out of date. So I got together with the hospital tutors in the region, and we said, what do we need from our students? And the main issue that they had was that their students came to the university, did their diploma, and the knowledge they got from that study day never went back to the trust. They never seemed to integrate it at all. They'd have a paediatric study day one day, and the next day they couldn't cope on a paediatric ward. So they really wanted the students to be able to integrate the knowledge they had from the diploma with their day-to-day practice. They also wanted to make sure their students had good communication and teamwork skills. They need to be able to communicate with all levels of health professionals and patients, so we wanted to make sure we checked that. They needed to be able to make effective use of resources, so know who to ask for what and be able to find information. And also they needed to manage their time and think on their own, be autonomous. And the stakeholders and me felt that the previous course didn't really do that because it was just an exam at the end. So we felt that in order to get a good junior pharmacist, these are the things that we needed to make sure we were assessing as part of the diploma. So we turned to a competency framework that's is used very widely in pharmacy. It's been validated to show that it accelerates and sustains junior pharmacist development. And it's basically a competency framework, and I'll give you an example of one of the competencies. Most of the pharmacy organisations support this general level framework, so it's very well recognised. So if a student can turn around at the end and say, this is where I am on the general level framework, that's going to help them get a job somewhere else. And it's recognised across the country by every trust. The problem with the general level framework is that it's got 101 competencies. So we needed to assess, and we still need to assess, students against 101 competencies, which is no fun at all. And they are split into 4 clusters which very closely actually map what we needed our students to do. So there's delivery of patient care, personal competencies, problem solving and management. So we felt that if we could assess our students against this framework, we kind of had it made really, and somebody else had done all the work for us. So that's what we were aiming to do. So this is an example of one of the competencies. So this is the patient consultation competency. And you can see that students can be assessed, and there's different ways of assessing. So some groups use self-assessment, whereas we needed external assessment by a tutor. But you can either do something rarely, if you do it less than a quarter of the time, sometimes, usually, or consistently. So we needed to know where our students were for each of those 101 competencies. We also needed to set some standards, so we needed to decide where we thought they should be on those competencies by the end. So the student got a nice book with all of these competencies in and had to go away and show us how they met them. So to make sure that we were having good clinical pharmacists at the end who got these skills, we made the GLF a pass-fail component. So our students have to pass the general level framework in order to progress. So that meant we needed to be able to assess it, and then we were faced with the same dilemma of how on earth do we manage to do that. We were quite lucky because there are some validated assessment tools that are widely used in medicine. So I don't know, have people heard of things like mini-KEXs and case-based discussions? No? So in medicine, there's some particular tools that they use to assess medics and see how they are at consultation skills and solving problems. And they've been used again in pharmacy, slightly adapted. So we use those basically. So there's a mini-KEX, which is it's kind of an on-the-spot. You watch the student do a consultation for 5 or 10 minutes, see if they can identify the main problems and think about how they would solve them. Then you've got case-based discussions, which are much more in-depth. So you have a discussion with the student about their patient, see why certain drugs are prescribed, why doses have been changed, why drugs aren't prescribed. And then you've got the direct observation of patient consultations, which is literally you watch a student do a consultation and assess their consultation skills. So we use these, and you can see the figures in brackets. They're the minimum amount that a student has to produce each year. So depending on the year they're in. So the first years do more mini-KEXs and less case-based discussions, and the second year do more case-based discussions. So we decided we needed all of these in our portfolio to help us assess. And so the students basically throughout the year need to complete these various assessments to demonstrate where they are on the general level framework. We also have a syllabus each year, and amongst those assessments they need to demonstrate that they've covered the syllabus. So for example, if a student did 7 mini-KEXs in respiratory, they would then struggle to show they've covered the rest of the syllabus. So they need to be broad and make sure they're covering all the clinical areas that they need to cover. So we have what we term practice tutors and assessors. So practice tutors is somebody who the student has for the whole time of the course. They have one tutor who they meet with on a regular basis and who monitors their progress. An assessor is just somebody in the trust who will do an assessment. So this is where your mentors and tutors come in. Actually, because the hospitals support us, all pharmacists in that hospital are expected to be able to perform these assessments and be registered on PebblePad and be able to fill in the electronic forms. So the idea is that at the end of the year, the students can sit down and say, well, I can demonstrate that I've met this competency because I've got 1 mini-KEX in this area, I've got 2 case-based discussions and 1 patient consultation. And the student themselves has to show how they've met those competencies. So you start to see that it was getting a little bit complex. The practice tutors have to meet with the student once a month, and they review their progress, as we said, and then the idea is that where a student's not at the level they need to be, they identify some things to do to make sure they get to the right level. So we're helping them to identify and hopefully meet their own learning objectives. And twice a year, in the middle of the year and at the end of the year, the practice tutor basically makes a declaration about where they think the student is on this competency framework. So are they on track for the end of the year or not, basically. And they declare that to the university. So all of this assessment happens in the hospital, and we just check it's being done, basically, and that it's being done right. And as I've said, we've set standards for the competencies for the end of the year, for where the students need to be. So we kind of had this vision of a bit of a nightmare, really. So these are the paper forms of a mini-KEX. So you can see there's tick boxes. These are actually according to the clusters of the general level framework. There's an area for the student to write what the case was, so we can check that they've covered the syllabus. An area for them to point out what they did especially well and where they might develop, and then some agreed actions. So this was a standard paper form that we wanted to use basically the structure of, but not on paper. So this is just to demonstrate, really. This is what our students have to submit in their portfolio. So there is, basically it's just to show there's a lot. It's a huge portfolio, and the workbook is complex to get it done. But I think it's kind of worth it. So the asterisk ones are the ones that have got, we've got electronic forms for on PebblePad, so that they're all done on PebblePad. So some are done at the beginning of the year, Some are done progressively throughout the year, and then others are done at the end as a sign-off. So this is what the students have to do. Okay, so the problem was, how on earth do we manage all of this? So we've got students all over the region doing multiple assessments, 15 different assessments probably in a year, with probably 15 different tutors, probably. You give a tutor a piece of paper and ask them to fill it in, you're probably never going to see it again. You're certainly going to get things lost, and we knew it just wouldn't work with paper. And I had visions. This is just, I think 70 of these portfolios are just horrendous, and I don't know if other people have the problem, but actually going through these paper portfolios, the actual kind of just the time really, isn't it, of trying to find everything, make sure it's there, it's never submitted in the right place, etc. So I was kind of on the edge of a nervous breakdown. And just to demonstrate, this was our region. So we're here in Bradford, and the hospitals that are furthest from us are, we have students from Scarborough, students from Hull, students from Sheffield, and kind of everywhere in the middle. And we recently had some from Oldham. So you can see that for us to say, okay, we'll go out and do these assessments, or we'll be able to go and do these practice-based assessments, just is never going to happen in a million years. There wasn't just me on the diploma, we now have 2 of us, but still it's pretty unmanageable. So we were totally reliant on hospital tutors to do this work for us. Okay, so now we have this lovely mini KEX form on PebblePad, and as you can see, the student fills in their name and their UB number, and then the assessor goes on and basically fills in, it's exactly the same form as the paper version, but on PebblePad. So they just grade the student between 1 and 6 about whether they meet expectations or not, and obviously that goes down the form. You can see it's auditable, so we can see who assessed the student and when, so we can track back to make sure that the people who are doing the assessors have been trained and we know that they're the right people. And we can see when things are being done. Now, there is a slight snag in that, is that I find everybody kind of tends to turn back to paper. So they are doing things on paper and then entering them later on. So we often don't get things entered till 3 months after they've been done, because that's when they can hassle a tutor to put them on PebblePad. But the idea is that they should be putting them in as they go along, and we can check that they're making progress. So that's just to reiterate the form again and to show you how many of the different forms we actually have managed to create on PebblePad, so we don't have to collect them by paper. The tutor meetings one actually has turned out to be really quite important, is that we're able to have a real-time record of tutor meetings and what's been agreed. So if we have a tutee at the end who says, my tutor never told me that I wasn't going to meet all the competencies by the end of the year, we've got something that says, well, these 3 tutor meeting records that you signed say they did, and you haven't done anything about it. So it equally works well for the students if they've said that they need help with something and the tutor's not done that, they've got that backup as well. So those tutor meeting records are actually have been really important. So what we get the students to do is to add their name to the form and submit to a workspace. The tutor then logs on, and PebblePad recognises that they're a tutor and not a student, and then they just complete their bit and release it to the student. So as I said, it doesn't need to be the student's practice tutor who does all of this. We register all the pharmacists in the trust, or most of them who've been trained, will have access to PebblePad and should be able to do this. And as I've already said, it's auditable. We can see exactly who's done what and when they've done it. Now the 2 things in italics are things that we used to do that we have now found a way not to do. So at the end of the year, what we initially made the students do, and this was before workbooks existed, was they had to create a webfolio. So if you can imagine all of that list of things they had to include, you can probably imagine how many of them actually got it right, and how much time we spent chasing them, saying, you haven't submitted this, and you haven't submitted that, and you submitted this in the wrong place. So that was a bit of a nightmare, and it also created a lot of anxiety for the students. So this is just an example of a previous webfolio that was submitted. So the students set it up, this is how they did it, they had their numerous titles, and they linked it through. So they generally did work it out, and they generally did a fairly good job, but there was often a lot of chasing. Okay, so what can you get from our experiences? So we started this in 2011, and I think PebblePad has evolved quite a lot since then. And we have had many, many hours trying to work out the best way to do this. But I think from January 15, we have managed to get a system that actually works. So we ended up with a huge number of assignments on our dashboard. So probably, I think I've got a picture actually of the number of assignments. So this is an example, and there was probably 3 pages like this. Of all the assignments that the students had, so there was pre-reading for each study day, mini-kexes, case-based discussions, tutor meetings. The list was just endless and impossible to manage. I couldn't find a way to navigate these assessments or get rid of them without deleting them completely, and because I think even when you pause them, they're still on the list, so you can't keep track of what you've done. So just going back to, there was a huge number of assignments that just took me hours to try and manage. As I said, students often submitted incomplete web folios without what we wanted in them, even though we gave them a very clear list with a tick box next to it to say what's on it. They still managed to get them wrong. We had a mass panic from students at the end of the year, thinking, oh God, I've got to put this portfolio together and I don't know how to do it. So we had loads of phone calls, loads of emails, and our submission date is the 5th of January. So they're all coming over Christmas, so we're not there. The students are panicking because they're getting auto replies, etc., and we were having to respond to all of these. And the students and the tutors, to be honest, struggled with the system. So the web folio system, well, the whole lot really, they found very clunky, very time-consuming and not intuitive at all. And bearing in mind, we are very reliant on our tutors in the hospital for their goodwill, really. You know, if they said we're not going to do this, we can't run the course. So we need to make it as easy as we can for them. So we then created a workbook, which I think has solved all the problems. So we have a separate page for each thing that the student needs to fill in, and we've also got a nested workbook. So this here, this mini-kex one, is a nested mini-kex workbook. So that means we can use that workbook in multiple modules. So we have 2 clinical modules, and we use a lot of the nested workbooks in both modules. So now we only have one assignment. So the student at the beginning of the year goes on, creates their workbook, to auto-submit, so it's there. That's it. So when you click on your assignments, there's one assignment and you can find everything. The workbooks are set to auto-submit, so the student doesn't even actually have to submit. And the student builds it throughout the year. So I think that's quite good developmentally, because it gets away from the mentality that you are creating a web folio at the end of the year. They are building it throughout the year as they go through. So hopefully we won't get that panic. Whether we do or not, we will see in December. Also, we can track the progress in real time, so we can see what the students have done, how are they keeping up to date, are they recording their tutor meeting records, and the students can mark the pages as complete, so they can say once they've done things, and we can get reports on that and find out how they're doing. One thing we did find, maybe nobody else does this, but we obviously released the template and then realised there were some things on it that didn't work. And we can make changes to the actual template that then filter through to the workbook, which has made a big difference to us, because we had a slight panic that, you know, after we'd finally got all this work done, we were going to have to tell the students to delete the ones they'd gotten, but they didn't. So we made some changes, and that went through to the workbooks the students had. And I've mentioned nested workbooks, which for us have been really, really useful, because it's such a massive portfolio that actually to have all of those, each assignment as a separate list would just, again, end up in a ridiculously long page. And it means we can reuse workbooks in different places. Okay, so what were the disadvantages? We found it very time-consuming to create, and I personally didn't find it intuitive at first. Once I'd worked out how to do it, it's fine, but I didn't find it intuitive at first. It's different for us. It was a different approach. So again, we've had to go back to the tutors and say, oh, actually, we've changed how we've done it again this year, and now we're using these workbooks. So we did get numerous emails saying they couldn't find the students' work, etc. So luckily we managed to produce a good troubleshooting document that says what they need to do. So that was helpful, I think. We don't actually know what the students think yet, because we've only just released it in January, but from what they've said to us, they find it better, and I can't see a possible reason why they wouldn't find it better, because there's no argument there, really. And certainly for tutors, we prefer it. We can easily log on and see where a student is in their work. There's no risk of students submitting to a different assignment and you never being able to find that work again. So the workbooks for us have really revolutionised the way we can run the course. The other thing that has become really useful for us, or that will become really useful for us, is the use that you can actually register external tutors direct with PebblePad, and this came from Jackie actually, you gave us the tip off about this. So again, we were tearing our hair out because we had to register all of our assessors through the University of Bradford IT system. So that meant we had to provide dates of birth, national insurance numbers. They then got access to email, the library, Blackboard, all the IT services that the university offers, which then the university obviously gets a bit twitchy about giving those people, and such a huge amount of people, unlimited access to all their IT resources. Whereas actually you can register tutors direct with PebblePad, which you can then manage yourself. Those passwords don't expire. You can just deal with them. So we're hoping that that's going to be a lot easier. So that's what we're aiming for. We're going to do a big changeover in September and get them all registered direct with PebblePad. So they won't have access to all the other areas of the university, but they don't need it. They don't use their emails. They just use PebblePad. So that should be good. So have we finally cracked it after about 5 years? I really hope we have, but I can certainly say that it's taken a lot of work and a lot of false starts and workarounds, I guess. But I think the system now is much easier to use. Okay, so just to summarise, we needed to produce a course that produced good clinical pharmacists. We couldn't have them who could just sit an exam. We introduced the general level framework and a suite of assessment tools. And PebblePad has enabled us to use expert external tutors in assessment. So actually, you're right, there's no point me assessing students in clinical practice anymore. I haven't been there for 4 years. I need the cardiology pharmacist to do that. It's enabled us to keep a track of student progress in real time, so we know exactly how they're doing. It also means that the students have a portfolio that they can take to interview. So all of our students really are going to be applying for it. They're all on 2-year contracts, so they're definitely going to need to apply for a new job at the end of those 2 years. And often they apply before that. And actually a lot of them have used the portfolio to help them in job interviews, because, as I say, the GLF is recognised by pharmacists all around the country. We have found many challenges, but we are next year about to roll out the workbooks to our undergraduate, what we call capability in pharmacy module. So that's about 200 students, so I guess that'll be the test. But I think we finally got it cracked. And I think that's the end, so I don't know if you've got any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Yeah, could you just say a bit more about how you got all the people in practice on board? How much training and support did they need?
Well, we were quite lucky because that's been the history of the course. So it's always been that people who are involved, all hospitals who send their students are expected to have tutors. So they were already there. We do give the trust a rebate for their tutoring time, but we have had to train them. So they've had to, at the minute we do run study days where they come for half a day and we talk through everything. But one of my next projects, for as soon as I can get my head above water, is to do that so it's online. Because actually the assessors need a very brief training, whereas the practice tutors who are having the meetings and doing the GLF assessments, they need a lot longer. So I think the assessors could just do an online training thing, take a test, so they could then do that in the trusts. So, but we're lucky that we've had the buy-in, and it is kind of expected from pharmacists that you will teach other pharmacists. So we've not had that mountain to climb.
Yeah, you said that the students could mark pages as complete. Where does that show within the workbook?
I think it's when you create is it on the template page, when you create a template?
It's certainly on each workbook.
Right, it's on the workbook you can
progress to be included in the tracking.
Yeah, there's a particular button when you create it that you just tick the box, and then it does it on every page.
It'll say the progress.
Okay, is that within the page?
Yeah.
It sounds like it's within the workbook.
I think it's the workbook level, but you can kind of deselect each page within the workbook as to whether you want it to be tracked or not, because there could just be text pages and there could be interactive, sort of dynamic pages. And it appears as sort of like a jagged line on the right hand side where you'd have the comments tab typically, the little sort of tab that sticks out. And the jagged lines, so the students can see what the level of completion is, tutors can, but then also that number appears within the Atlas submissions page as just another number.
And I think if you run reports, which we haven't done yet, but then it tells you what they've got complete, doesn't it? So you can kind of get students have got this many pages complete, which I think will be useful. When we get to the halfway point, we'll be doing that.
I've got another question on that. Is that just related to whether they put something in an active box, or is they have to actually say I've completed it?
They tick there's a little circle at the bottom that they tick to say it's complete.
It's their action.
Yeah. No, so this, well,
the students?
do you mean to say it's complete or
Or
generally?
do the tutors validate the students?
Well, no, because they're filling it in. So a tutor will fill it. So for example, a mini KEX, the only way that that feedback can get there is if a tutor's filled it in. So they then don't need to validate it. They just, it's there. So
Validation's just a GLA.
yeah, which we have stopped using. So in answer to your, is there one thing you would have? We tried to use the profile to assess the general level framework, and we just couldn't manage it. It took far. The tutors were just, no, we can't do this. So we now give them a paper copy of the general level framework and a form that they say this is how many competencies they've got left to do. So that's on PebblePad, but the actual entire general level framework, competency by competency, just turned into a monster that we just couldn't control and we couldn't expect. Because we also had the issues about IT in the NHS that we had a big issue when we upgraded to the new PebblePad because most of the trusts couldn't get access to it. So that was, or they couldn't get access to all the features, which we only found out after we'd done it. So that was interesting as well. So we've had to be very careful that we definitely are making things simpler and not more complicated. So the profiles would be, if we could get a way for those to work, that would make a huge difference to us, I think.
You mentioned the mini KEX and DOPSIs and things like that. University of Liverpool Medical School are doing some work with us at the moment to create some offline forms to go in the mobile app. So their students go out on placements, they experience all the same sort of things. So we're building those into the system.
Yeah, that'd be good.
How much we can share them, we need to have a conversation. It'd be nice to be able to then share them more broadly. But it's something that if you have got certain forms that you really, really want to push out offline, come and have a word with me and we'll see what we can do.
That would be really useful, because that is what the students have asked for.
Yeah, the mini KEX and the adoption thing, certainly within pharmacy, they're an open document. They've been available to anybody in pharmacy for as long as, it's not, there's no copyright or anything on them. They're just, so I don't know if it's the same in medicine, but I assume it is because I think they're used all across medicine as well.
The difference is it's actually built into the app itself, so you can actually just send it straight through just as a little mini form,
Yeah, it would be good to have
which
that.
could be good.
Yes. We haven't got our students using like iPads or anything on the ward yet. I'm not sure how far away that is really for NH. I don't think the NHS is going to be buying iPads for students anytime soon, and I don't think the university is either. We've had a few conversations, but we've never got very far.
See, we're always asked for a reading list for our students. They want to know a reading list before they start, etc. So we make some suggested reading, but last time, because we were moving to PebblePad, we also put on there that you may want to consider buying a tablet of some description because we will be using online portfolio.
Right. We do have
It
the.
doesn't have to be iPad, you know, it can be a cheaper version.
Yeah, I think that would make a big difference if they could do that.
So we planted the seed before they even came to university.
Yeah, that's a good.
Mum, Dad, I think.
See, we have a slight issue because a lot of our, well, not a lot, but a good proportion of our students they might have had a career in community pharmacy, for example, and then come into hospital. So they might have been qualified for 10 years, and some of them have got no idea about technology at all. Whereas others are straight out of university and hot on it. So we do have, I think, where the students have done incorrect submissions and things, that's often because they just can't use the technology. And because the portfolio is quite complex, they just can't manage it. So, sorry, Carol, you had a question.
You were saying you've just released this workbook in January, but over the 5 years, what kind of feedback have you had from the tutors and students?
I think because as a web folio it was very clunky, they really don't like it, and actually most of the feedback we get is quite negative. Now I'd like to kind of say to them, alright, well, do it on paper then, and you can come from Scarborough and bring your big lever arch file and see how happy you are about that. But so I think it's partly kind of they've never experienced the alternative, but I think also it hasn't been very smooth. So these long lists of assignments that they've had to choose from, and particularly another change we've made this year is that we had one kind of one workspace for the whole 2 years of the diploma, and that ended up with probably 50 assignments, whereas now we've split it into years, which makes it again more manageable. But so I think the navigation, and particularly when we're trying to use the profiles where the students go in and self-assess, but the assessors can't actually assess. So to change a grade, the assessor has to log out, and the student has to log back in, and all of that, they just see it as being very time-consuming. I think with the workbooks, it's just so easy that I think they will start to see, actually this is making life easier now. But I haven't had that feedback yet.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.